Welcome to the Geek and Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal profession. I'm Greg Lambert, and I am soloing this week because I am still in Houston. I go to New York tomorrow. Marlene is already in New York, and I'm sure is neck deep in some meetings. Caroline, she said to make sure she passed on her well wishes and congratulations to you as well. So,
Greg, thank you.
Sure. So this week I got a little ahead of myself. I'm talking with the great Caroline Hill, editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, and a weekly contributor / regular with the Bob Ambrogi's Friday afternoon, Friday evening for you, legal tech news webinars that he does each week. So, Caroline, welcome back to the Geek and Review.
Thank you so much, Greg. And Bob may disagree that I'm a regular. They're all teasing me about how irregular I am because it's very late. It's 8 p.m. on a Friday. If it was any other day than Friday.
Yeah.
But I absolutely love chatting with those guys. I join them as often as I can.
Yeah, I'm a regular on the audience side, and I get every once in a while when he runs out of other people, he'll reluctantly ask me to come sit in, and then it'll be months before he's asking again. So
that is not true. And I know you've been on recently, and it's always a great thing when you contribute.
Well, thanks. Well, this week, most of us are on our way to New York for Legal Week, but I'm guessing, unfortunately, that we won't be seeing you coming in from the UK. Am I correct that you're not going to be there this year?
I'm not. I'm so sad about it. This is the first time in years. It's funny because I kind of have a love-hate with the conference. I dread it, and I love it. I dread the scheduling. I never know. I never feel like I do it well. I always feel like maybe I should have met more people. Maybe I should have done more sessions, But I do mostly love going. It's such a great opportunity to see people. And this is the first time in years that I won't be there. So I have this, I'm quite sad. But there it is. I'm glad that you're going. You're going.
I'll go and I'll fill you in on everything, I'm sure. You can let me know what you want me to find out for you, and I'll pass it along.
That's not the same, but thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You know what? This face-to-face, I think we realised this after looked at, that we do a lot online. This is lovely. No criticism of this kind of thing. But it's just that face-to-face. It's just no, there's no substitute, is there?
Yeah. The you know what though, Bob mentioned something a couple of weeks ago that I've had the same issue, and maybe I don't know if you've run into this as well, but where it used to be like vendors would invite you to go do something specific. It's like, well, come here, let us show you this, or we'll go do this or do this, or we'll have this conversation. And Bob and I both have been getting this kind of generic, hey, let's just hang out and talk kind of thing. And I think we both agree that we probably have gotten beyond that now. I think last year that was kind of okay, but this year I think we kind of want to get back to more substance rather than just, kind of hanging out. Have you seen that at all?
So when they would take you to give me like?
Well, it was just like, oh, we want to go to coffee, and well, what's the topic? Oh no, we just want to chat.
Yeah, right. So they had previously they had like a specific thing that they would brief you on, and now that's just one. Yeah, yes, I suppose so, because actually thinking about it, I am doing recordings, some video recordings, which is mostly driven by my fear of missing out. So I want to be involved. So I decided to do some video recordings of announcements. And to be fair, a lot of the announcements are more, even those where we're videoing it, are quite often just, they've pitched it as catch up. So yeah, I suppose if we were in person, that would be the case.
Yeah.
It's funny, because I don't know. I think there have been a lot of announcements. I mean, obviously we're going to come on to what those may be about. We've had a bit of a giggle about what in advance. I interviewed Scott Rechtschaffen, the CKO of Littler, which I published just before Legal Week, and we were laughing about what some of the announcements might be about during the conference.
Yeah.
I think people do have announcements, coming up. But yeah, I mean,
I'm sure it'd be something about they're launching an AI tool.
Maybe.
I could be wrong.
Might be one. Or maybe that they have a strategy around it.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but it's not as much fun to be that specific on things. So, well, speaking of kind of announcements, there's some big news for Legal IT Insider that you have a new official media partnership with NetLaw Media. So congratulations on that. Do you mind sharing some insights on the benefits that you see with this partnership? And specifically, I know you were talking a lot in the press release about being able to enhance your coverage of the British Legal Technology Forum, or BLTF, and the British Legal Technology Awards for your audience. Now, I will say, and we talked a little bit before we pressed record, that there's probably some of us over on this side of the pond that aren't familiar with it. So can you give us a little kind of high, altitude vision of what those are, and then what you're hoping to get out of this partnership?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
Sure.
NetLaw Media, the chief executive is Frances Anderson, and it's great to be working with another female leader. I'm not going to lie, but I absolutely love the fact that we're both women, although that's not why we're partnering. NetLaw Media has run the British Legal Technology Forum for years. It's an exhibition style conference. I went to it for the first time last year. And was blown away by how big it is. They have 12,000 visitors. It's not just legal tech, so they have people from law, legal technology, IT security. It runs in May, so this year it's on the 14th of May, and they have lots of different themes going through. There's lots of different stages, lots of different topics. So last year I chaired a panel at the British Legal Technology Forum. We were it was quite fun actually. It was called I think we got in the DeLorean and we went back in time to work out what we would do differently with the benefit of hindsight, how we would sort of look at various technological changes with the benefit of hindsight, which was really good fun. And the partnership will mean, so we partner with, we've got a partnership with AmLaw. As a media outlet, we're impartial, and I just want to make it clear that we will promote anybody's conference. This doesn't mean that we won't suddenly start working, with promoting what Legal Geek or what ILTA or what Law.com are doing. It's very important that we will cover the details of all of these conferences as it's right to do as a media outlet. But I am really excited about this partnership with NetLaw Media because there's such a big synergy between what we do. They focus on legal technology and IT security. Obviously, that's most of my time talking about that. And we know the same people. We have the same sponsors, but we also have some. I can help. So the idea is that they do events and we do content. We do a little bit in the way of events. They do a little bit in the way of content. But we've got this amazing synergy in terms of how we can support one another. So we can give their vendors an outlet. So when I can be involved in the conference, I can help. And that's a real benefit to me in terms of really being part of the conversation as we need to be, and also then provide their speakers with an outlet, in terms of talking about some of the really important topics that they're going to be talking about, giving them an opportunity, because one day it goes so quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And, before you know it. And so we'll be talking about, giving them an opportunity to talk about some of the topics in advance and afterwards. And so I think it's a really great opportunity for both of us to support one another. And obviously, we hope that it will also grow it will help us grow both our businesses. They're going to be referring people to us for work that we can do. We'll be referring people to them for things that will benefit the vendors that we perhaps work with. And I think it will grow in time. In fact, I know it will grow in time. So we're really excited about it.
Oh, great. Now you said that's the BLTF, right? The British Legal Technology Forum.
Yeah.
And that's May 14th.
That's right. Yeah, that's May 14th.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it's just a one-day event.
It's a one-day event. Francis is going to kill me. I think it's ending.
Well, it's still pretty new, so it's
for one day last. Do you know what? Let's not dwell on that. I think
Okay.
I'm still learning because that was the first time that we've been involved in any capacity. I was involved on one day. Francis would literally murder me, but it's really well known over here, and it's something that it's kind of a highlight of the calendar. And I know Francis is growing it every year. So it's definitely worth a look. And the other thing that they do is the awards, which is in the autumn. It's a bit later than autumn, November. And again, they have several hundred people from law, the legal sector and legal tech come. I was there last year, and they awarded Charles Christian, my predecessor, who everyone knows, who sadly passed away. It was a year ago, or more than a year ago now, but it was just over a year at the time of the awards, and they gave him a posthumous award for his contributions to legal tech, which was very special. So I was able to go on stage and do a 5-minute talk, which had happened right at the end of the evening at 10:30. It was very special. Again, the awards is something that if people aren't familiar on that side of the pond, it's definitely worth a look.
Okay, all right. Well, I know May is not that far away. No. Is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to for the BLTF conference or meeting?
We've got to plan. So we've announced we're doing over the next. It's going to be a really busy month. So we're sort of got a lot of planning to do. I will be told probably what I'm going to be talking about. The truth be told,
that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, and then we've got kind of a schedule, that we're going to be following in terms of coverage of some of the key speakers. They've got really cool speakers and people involved. So they've got Jennifer Swallow, who most people will know from Law Tech UK. They've got Christina Blacklaws, who's managing director of Blacklaw Consulting, but she's been involved in a regulatory capacity in the past. They've got Professor Richard Siskind, who everybody knows. He's going to be involved in the conference. They've got the list goes on. So they've got Libby Jackson, who's at Herbert Smith, and the idea will be that so they've got Ian Jeffrey from the Law Society, Christian Toon, who's the head of Cyber Professional Services, Pinsent Mathers. I won't read the whole list. And the idea is that I'll be speaking to some of these people who will be chairing various of the sessions, and we'll be diving into some of the topics that they're going to be talking about. So we've got a lot to do over the following months. If you want to have a look, so it's just BritishLegalITforum.com, and you can see some of the speakers and some of the topics as they come up.
All right, and I'll definitely make sure we put a link on for that. And I like the fact that there was a nice diverse group of speakers that you were naming off there as well, and I'm sure that's intentional. Yes,
of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me kind of shift gears on you a little bit, because the last year, 12, 14 months has just been bonkers, right? It's just been absolutely insane, especially with the type of news that you cover. So I wanted to ask you, what's been your take on, the hype versus reality that we're seeing with all the AI tools, from all the talk about it versus the implementation. What's kind of been your view of this over the past year plus?
Yeah, gosh, it has been crazy, hasn't it? And it's been busy. Yeah, it's so fun though. So I mean, where to start? So the hype. So I think last year there was such a mixed reaction depending. I don't think that you could generalize or even predict necessarily what people's reaction would be in terms of how they thought about it. So obviously, have we said the words Gen AI? We haven't actually labelled it, have we? But, we know what we're talking about. Right. So, in terms of where people put it, in terms of the box that we all need in our head, it was so varied last year. So some people would think, I think rightly, we all think rightly that this is going to change the way that we practice law. Mm-hmm. That's my take on it. But in what time frame is another question altogether. And I think that some people were very much like, this is absolutely radical. It's an inflection point. And some people were like, oh, this is really hyped up, And I had some really interesting conversations with people last year that helped me put that in perspective, talking about that, and this actually came from Casey at Lex Fusion, who was saying, that was one of my really most helpful conversations about it last year, because Casey was saying just because it's massively at the top of the hype cycle doesn't mean it's not an inflection point. And just because the products are really early doors in terms of Gen AI, and maybe some of them will fail, maybe some of them won't work, maybe some of them, or just because we're about to dive into the Gartner's pit of
yeah.
trough of disillusionment, doesn't mean that this isn't an inflection point. It just means that hype and inflection can go together, right? So that was really helpful to put into context all the conversations that I was having and people's various reactions, and they're very mixed. A lot of people had very different views last year in terms of where we were at, the impact that it would have, and the time frame. But the one thing that I would say is that from the conversations that I had, and I had a lot of them with CIOs, some of them were made public. I wrote a report we agreed, it wasn't Chatham House, it was kind of off the record, but we would agree quotes, which is available on my website, legaltechnology.com. We created a report from some of the top CIOs in the UK, top 200 firms. And there's a lot of caution, as custodians of clients' data. The overriding sentiment from that meeting, there was a lot of variance in terms of who was doing what, but there was a lot of caution. They weren't denying that it was an inflection point or anything, but they were just saying we are custodians of our clients' data and therefore we are cautious. Whereas a lot of clients are saying in their RFPs, what are you doing about this? Yeah. And how are you saving us money, and why are we not seeing the results? And I can see both their points.
Yeah.
Does that accord with you, Greg?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I'm thinking that we may be a little overly cautious. To me, I think some of the issues have already been resolved, and I think we're still arguing about issues that were problems in March of 2023, rather than what are the issues now. Yeah. And I think sometimes, people can put that up as barriers to moving forward. And I worry a little bit about that, but I think, again, the genie's out of the bottle on this. And you're right, the pressure coming in from the client side, just saying things like, what are you doing? Give me something that you're actually doing with this, and not just a press release of you're working with some company on something that may come out 6-12 months from now. I think everyone's kind of looking for some proof in the pudding, to seeing some real effects of this, because I think everyone thinks this is an inflection point, and we're really kind of worried that we will somehow or another go back to business as usual, with the hopes that it's really not something that makes that big of an impact on the industry. And I think that's just a bad reaction.
Agreed. So a couple of points. One, I still think the cost is a huge issue. So I think people are excited. Some people are excited about the likes of Copilot. Some people are very much already doing pilots. The firms that are doing pilots with Harvey and Copilot and a bunch of other very much in the public domain. Cost, I think, is a big question still for firms. When they're being asked to demonstrate ROI, it's very early days to be able to demonstrate ROI. I agree with you completely that doing nothing, and I think that there are so many vendors that are doing some quite interesting stuff. I do think cost is going to be the issue, but I've spoken to CIOs where their chosen way is to deal with their business partners. That's how they're going to move forward and rely, but they don't have the expertise. A lot of firms don't have the expertise building stuff, they never have. So actually they're saying, well, we do have a great number of business partners who are doing some, really good stuff that we can lean on them. And I think that's probably the solution, subject to the caveat of that cost is going to be an issue, right? And how you get that past your CFO. The good thing is, I think, that this is now a board level conversation in a way that it never has been. It's not like when you were trying to choose a PMS and saying, right, we need this much money. This is the whole board being very much aware of the need to do things differently. So I think that's going to make things easier from anything signed off perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're going to see is especially on the law firm side, which is kind of where I'm focused. Those that have done kind of these projects before, that have these relationships, are going to do great things. And those that have never really kind of tested the waters on building good vendor relationships, doing third-party build-outs, getting that going, I think they're going to struggle with this, and it's going to. It's not something that they can just kick down the road, and it's not something that they're set up to do themselves. No. And so it's I think the quicker that they understand how the it's going to work, and how you can't just do it all yourself. There has to be these relationships and this back and forth. I think the quicker they figure that out, the quicker they can get back on track.
But the challenge is also going to be these capacity and wait lists, right? Which is sort of it's fascinating to me that it's become a source of competition. I actually was slightly tongue-in-cheek writing about a UK firm that has become one of the testers of one of the big publishing companies. I should just say it's about, I've written it, I'm being a bit funny. Maybe they didn't realise that I was taking the mick. But so one of the managing partners was very much like, oh, we're one of the early users, and I was like, it's become a source of competition. Who gets selected to be the beta firm, right? Which, I mean, absolutely, but it's just another source of competition, and it is the more progressive firms who've got the biggest teams, who have got the biggest capacity to really benefit the vendors. In terms of, have you got an R&D team? Have you got an AI team? Have you got people that understand how to use the technology fairly rapidly? And those are the firms that are being selected for these betas. I agree with you. The other really fascinating thing, talking about the client though, and this came up from my conversation with Scott at Littler. So he was saying that the clients have started demanding, he had one client that said, if within a year you're not using generative AI, we're going to go to a different law firm. And which is a fairly, I mean, I get it on one level. And then on the other level, I was laughing a little bit because I was like, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Do you need it? Like, what are we doing with it, right? Does it have to be Gen AI? Like, why? That's pretty.
Yeah, pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've never been a big fan of this kind of draconian style of, if we have zero tolerance for this, you're either using Gen AI or you're out kind of things. And it's like there's so many other factors in there. But I wanted to go back to the thing you said, which I think you're spot on. And that is, I think a lot of the firm side or those that haven't already established those relationships, that capacity issue, I don't think they're thinking about that. I think that they think, well, once I pull the trigger on this and decide that we're, going to go ahead with it, well, we'll just, call out to vendor X and they'll be ready to take on our business. And I don't think they realize that, they've got a narrow pool of professionals that can do this right now, and they're going to be at capacity. And, if you're not, ready now and starting to prepare, that boat gets further and further off from the dock, and at some point you can't catch up to it.
What do you think what would because you've obviously been doing this a long time and you've got that insider benefit. What would you say they would have to do right now in order to make sure that they're ready?
I think they got to get their toe wet on something, even if it's not something that's going in front of the client directly. And in fact, I think the worst thing you could do is do something that either, is super client facing that you're not really, 100% confident in, or go after something that undercuts the billable hour. I think those are those would be two mistakes to start off with. I think it's much more, we're at a point now where you need to, let's say you're going to use Copilot with Microsoft Azure, right? Yeah. Which I think most firms are very comfortable in taking that approach. Pick something, as my friend Ryan McLeod says, take something that's like 50% BS, where it's, not super, super important, but something that you could streamline, that would handle some of the issues that you're facing, maybe administrative side, maybe it's something with marketing or business development or client intake, something that's on the admin side, and start getting to know how these processes work. What works, what doesn't work, what are the tools that are out there, which tools work better with this and which tools work better with that. But you got to be doing something. And if you're sitting back and you're still planning, again, that ship is leaving the dock. And so, yeah, so that's and I love interviewing reporters because I end up getting interviewed. So
I've had so many. We're not going to do this now, Greg. Don't stop panic. But I love being challenged as well. I've been challenged so much on LinkedIn. I don't get challenged lots actually. Don't suddenly everyone start barreling in. But I think it's important for all of us to question ourselves and as reporters, it's important for us to, not just perhaps roll out the same tropes, but actually sometimes I come across people who are absolutely, obviously you've been wrong, but, they're brilliant and they challenge me about, well, why should everyone be using Microsoft 365 and Copilot, and does it even work? And, all this this has been this conversation that's been coming up on Teams and well, why is this something that should just happen, and because I write a lot about how law firms are very much now a lot in most cases, based around 365, and that Copilot seems to be the logical next thing. And then well, why? And I actually, I need to think about this because this has been very new, and and I see so many advantages, and I think Microsoft are doing some really clever stuff. But I do think it's important for all of us to be I think everyone needs to get their toes wet. Everyone needs to learn. Everyone needs to play around. Everyone needs to have a strategy. But also we need to be critical, right? We can't just be swept along, and oh yeah, this is just what's happening. I think it falls on all of us to sort of engage our brains and actually take it when somebody goes, well, have you thought about this? And maybe the answer is no.
Well, that's a good point. And I did bring up Microsoft mostly because it's what we have.
Yeah.
It's who we have relationships with. And I think it's a good first start. But I think your point, I hadn't really gone that deep into it. But you're right, but that's not the end. That's the beginning. And you should be very critical of it. You should be demanding. You're paying Microsoft a ton of money.
Exactly. And actually, they're in a very strong position, and we're not going to start Microsoft bashing on this podcast, but they're, actually, they are a vendor, right? And I would actually say to people, let's with all of the excitement, and this goes for any vendor, right? So there's a real shift from law firm power to vendor power at the moment, right? So and that is fine. The vendors often, as we already mentioned, have the capacity for research and development, and they have the developers, and that's fine. But they are, at the end of the day, selling a product, and actually I think it falls to all of the buyers to not get swept up, and this is in the way that we do, because we want to do what everybody else is doing, but actually really interrogate the product and interrogate their strategy, and also interrogate, in the case of Microsoft, one of my concerns, conversation for a different time, would be about the eggs in one basket, right? And the risks that presents. There's all these things that it's so exciting, and I don't spend the time going, oh, there's so many risks, you shouldn't be doing this. That's absolutely not the approach. And do you know what, folks? This is exciting. I think it's really exciting. I think, it presents so many opportunities to get rid of tasks that nobody wants to do. I think that people culturally, we need to focus on some of the real positives. I think there's a lot of focus on risk and compliance, and that's fine. But so I'm saying like a lot of contradictory stuff here. I know that, but I'm not sure that's very helpful.
That's what happens when you're thinking out loud about these things, because it's still ongoing. So. Well, let me put you on the spot then again, and I think we're kind of leading to this. I'll shoot you with the crystal ball question, and that is, over the next 2 to 5 years, what do you see as either a significant change or a challenge that the legal industry is going to have to come and deal with?
Change or challenge? Do you mean so?
You pick. Do you want? It's either one.
I think we're just going to be using it without even thinking about it. I mean, the time frame is the interesting question, because there's that old, the old saying about, things will happen much slower and then much faster than we think. So it's not going to happen as quickly as we think, but then when it does happen, it's going to happen real quick. And so. I think that we would just be using it, and in the same way as when I drive my car, I don't worry too much about how the engine works. I think we're going to be using Gen AI without even now obsessing, like we obsess now about what kind is it GPT-4, or is it 3.5, or is it, what is it? I think we're just going to be using it. I think that we're going to be. I think there's going to be screw ups. I think that really interesting analogy that someone made was about email, right? So in the early days of email, we never thought lawyers would be using it. We worried about there being breaches. We worried about them missending emails to people and exposing confidential data. And all of that happened, and it still continues to happen, right? But that didn't mean that it was a bad thing, or that but I think there's going to be lots of teething problems. I think that in the end, we're all going to be using Gen AI day to day, just as normal, just as we are with email. I think it's going to be seismic shift. I think that it will substantively change the way that people practice. I do believe that, and I think there'll be providers that probably we haven't heard of yet that come in and that offer the opportunity to do. I think they'll say, well, right, you can do this in a different, better way. I think that for vendors, think that there is a section of the market where I would be panicking if I was them, because the stuff that they do, I think there's a risk of Gen AI, bigger players being able to do it, some of the point solutions. But then also, let's not forget that a lot of it comes down to relationships still, and you buy from people, and also, I don't know, there's so many thoughts. Like we've seen examples of big players come in and absorb everything and turn it into a big machine, which is supposedly this great big integrated thing, and sometimes that doesn't work so well. So it'd be really fascinating, to be honest with you, to see how this all plays out. I don't know does that accord with what you think or no?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I like the idea of, there's probably going to be some vendors we've never, that don't exist now, as at least as we know, and it makes me think back of during the .com boom, and then kind of into the 2008 downturn, when big vendors would buy up some of the smaller vendors. And there was kind of this grumbling of, well, now that product's dead, because it never really worked in a large, in a big company environment, and so maybe they figured it out this time, because they seem to be, the big vendors seem to be, going full force into AI, whether it's build or buy. But again, I think we are, 5 years from now, there's going to be some big company that everyone's talking about that no one's talking about right now.
I think you're right. And I also think that it'd be fascinating to see, for law firms or corporates, the ones that, like you said, about have the relationships already, the ones that have the team, the ones that have their data in order. So in the corporate space, there's some CLM companies. They're doing some pretty cool stuff, Obviously, the corporates that already have their clause libraries in order are going to be the ones who start to take advantage of that quicker, and that will be interesting to see what that looks like. In whether the others will catch up. I guess they will, but what that will mean, in terms of competition. So I think that there's still got to be a massive focus on data, right? Like we talked about that. That's something that probably hasn't changed, and it'd be interesting to see how that conversation changes over the next little while. Like at what point we stop talking about that, if we ever stop talking about that.
We will never. That has been a 25-year overnight, story. That every time there's an innovation, the first thing we talk about is, well, but our data is for crap. It's like, that'd be great, but first we need to hire a bunch of data stewards to clean up everything. And I do think the one thing that's different about this is if companies, firms, vendors can figure out how do we automate that cleanup as much as we can, that will be the biggest game changer of all. And that's something. Once the data is cleaned up and it's set up to automatically be cleaned up as new data is created, then that's a self-solving problem.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. But no, it's exciting. I think it's one of those. I think I've been doing this since 2014, and there's faster change than ever before. And it's. Yeah, I can't wait to see this time next year. Like if we're sitting here, what? But I don't know that we'll be able to predict, or maybe it'll be just the same as last year. Do you think it'll be? I do think there's going to be more mistakes. I think that there's going to be some. I think there's so many pockets where you can already see, like the big publishing houses are doing some very cool stuff. In terms of they've got the data, right? So Lexis Thompson. VLEX, they've got the ones where they've got a lot of data and they can ground it in there and they can do all the cool stuff that they're doing right now. I think that's really interesting, going to be really interesting to watch. And then obviously, there's a ton of other, vendors out there that are doing interesting stuff and more to emerge. I think one of the things we have focused so heavily on OpenAI and GPT. I think that we're going to hear a lot more about other large language models over the next year, I think. And we'll realise probably that they were already, some of the vendors were already working with those other models, but they just hadn't got quite as much airtime.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Caroline Hill, I am sad that I won't get to see you in New York this week, but I am happy that we found time to have this conversation, and congrats on the new partnership that Legal IT Insider has with NetLaw Media. So congrats.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's always such a pleasure. I'm so sorry that I won't see you, but we'll hopefully get together again soon.
All right. And of course, thanks to everyone in our audience for taking the time to listen to the Geek and Review podcast. If you enjoy the show, please share it with a colleague, and we'd love to hear from you on all the socials. So Marlene can be found on LinkedIn, or she can be found on X at GayBauerM, and on Threads at mgaybauer66. And I can be reached on LinkedIn or on X at Lambert. Caroline, if someone wants to learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, on LinkedIn. I mostly use LinkedIn. So just look me up, Caroline Hill, editor, Legal IT Insider. And our URL for the website is legaltechnology.com.
All right, easy. And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. Thank you, Jerry, and thanks, everyone. See you, Caroline.
Thanks, Greg.